Alfie, if you could hit recording. Lovely stuff. So, just a brief bit more information about what we do and who we are as Hope for the Future to give you guys a sense of what this training is about and what it serves to achieve. So, Hope for the Future is a climate-focused democratic engagement charity with a vision of UK communities and politicians working together to secure a healthy planet for all. And what we mean by that is basically we would notice that there's a huge gap between the communities that have so much to say about what they want to have changed on a political level, particularly within the climate and nature sector, who just feel very detached from the politicians who have access to the levers of power. And so we aim to build that bridge through a whole series of things, but particularly by developing and upskilling individuals to know how to navigate those systems, reach out to politicians and make it clear what they want to see within climate and nature policy in particular, although many of our skills that we teach are applicable to other areas of policy. Um, and to create a counter narrative to many of the corporate lobbies that push other ideas in the other direction and have a seamlessly endless pool of resources to access to put their ideas across. So, like I say, we do this in a range of ways. Training like this is just one of them. We do also have Climate Connect, which is a new platform that we created this year, which is a way to further develop your campaigning and your engagements with local politicians. Um, so really, this is a next step up from our training. It can help you find other local campaigns in your area, and also it's an information sharing platform where people can share their interactions with different politicians and their actions that they have taken, and feedback a little bit about what has gone well and what hasn't gone as well. Um, but generally, it's just a great place to find like-minded individuals to connect your efforts up from, smaller local campaigns to bigger national campaigns, and also to get a sense of, which decision makers are having really positive experience with the campaigners, which ones seem to be more reluctant and maybe need more work, and essentially allows you to just find a place where you can connect with the wider climate and nature campaigning in across the sector. So we have a QR code up on the screen now if you want to scan that. It will, I believe, also be in the follow-up email, so you'll be able to find out more about it there. And Alfie, if you could also just pop the link into the chat as well. So if anyone wanted to just open that up and have a look at it later, then you'll have access to that then as well. But we wanted to inform you with that because it really can help amplify a lot of the skills that we're going to go through today. So, before I hand over to Alfie to talk a little bit more about the autumn budget, what it means, and why we are particularly focusing on this political event, just a quick outline of how we're going to work today. So, we're going to, like I say, have a bit more information about the budget itself, why now is a good time to act, and also why writing to your local MP about the budget has any influence at all. And we can talk a little bit more about where you can be most effective in your engagement with politicians around this budget. Then we'll kind of go launch straight into structuring letters and things to consider when we're writing our letters. And then we'll talk a little bit about specifically the crafting of an elevator pitch, what we mean by that, and how it's helpful within letters themselves. And finally, we'll look at how you can use the how you could build those letters, particularly around securing a meeting with local politicians. So we have an activity at the end where we basically have a five-step approach to writing letters. And they will be focusing on securing a follow-up meeting. Although the structure itself, to be clear, can also be used even if you're not necessarily interested in meeting with your MP afterwards, although we always recommend it. And then finally, we'll talk about next steps and other ways you can get interact with us and get involved with us. And then finally, a Q&A at the end for any questions that you might have that maybe you feel you don't just want to pop in the chat through the session. Because again, reminder that you can ask questions in the chat at any point. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Alfie, who's going to tell us a little bit more about the budget and why letter writing can be a powerful tool around this event.
Fab. Thank you, Joe. Great. So just to recap, I'm sure some of you have been following the budget and the fallout from it too. We're not going to talk about the whole budget today. We are going to focus in on the climate and nature elements of it. But just as a bit of an overview before we do that, what is the budget and why does it matter? So the budget is probably the biggest political moment in a usual parliamentary calendar. It's when the Chancellor stands up and says, here's what we're going to spend the money on. Here's how we're going to bring money in to spend. So how we're going to tax, how we're going to spend, what we're going to do about debt and things such as that. So it's a really big deal, and it often sets the direction of Parliament for at least the next year. Normally happens in autumn, as we've just seen. I mean, I don't know if you can count the very end of November as autumn, but that's besides the point. And then there's sometimes little mini budgets, as they're called, in spring or other parts of the year. And yeah, it's where the government says what they're going to spend on education, what they're going to spend on health, what they're going to spend on policing and other public services, including what they're going to do on their climate and nature agenda. So if we head on to the next slide, this was an interesting year for climate and nature. It wasn't a particularly green budget, I wouldn't say. So there was some mentions of important environmental policy, but it wasn't an explicitly green project. When Rachel Reeves talked about climate and nature, it was usually in connection to other things. And she actually didn't say the word climate or nature once in the entire speech, which is interesting. But that doesn't mean it doesn't have significant implications. So a few of the big things that have come out of it, just as a reminder, there's some changes to the way electric vehicles will be taxed. So they will have to pay a levy to basically pay road tax like other vehicles do. This is being seen as the argument for this is that as more and more people use electric cars, the government has to bring in revenue to afford to maintain roads and infrastructure. But some people are suggesting that it makes the argument to transition to electric vehicles a little bit more muddled. There was also some significant funding additions to kind of EV infrastructure at the same time, though. A big one that's got quite a lot of media pickup is that rail fares will be frozen next year for the first time in almost 20 years. And that means that, well, exactly 20 years actually. And that means that as inflation continues to rise, rail will become a comparatively cheap form of transportation, which, seeing as it's often the greenest form of transport, could be a really positive move. But some people were hoping the government would go further and actually reduce rail fares, which it hasn't. And then the other kind of big one on transport was that the fuel duty reduction, which has been in place since 2022, is going to end next September on kind of a slow 6-month taper out. That reduction in fuel duty has cost the government about £100 billion since it was introduced in lost revenue. So it'll be a real tax raiser. And the hope is that that money will be spent on kind of climate and nature initiatives while raising the price of petrol at the pump. If we head on to the next slide, the other big thing, and bear with me here because this one is a little bit dull, but still important, is that the government has changed some of the levies and taxation subsidies that they charge on energy bills. So up until now, there's been a significant levy placed on electricity, and lots of climate campaigners have been campaigning for these levies to be reduced because they don't reflect the current makeup of electricity, which is much more green than it was when it was introduced. And they skew the difference between electricity and gas, so make it look comparatively cheaper to use gas and comparatively more expensive to use electricity than it actually is. So they've scrapped some of them and brought them onto national taxation, which people are really positive about in general. But they have also scrapped the Energy Company Obligation Scheme, which is a big retrofitting funded scheme. And by scrapping that project, they've reduced the amount of money that the government's going to spend on insulation by about a quarter, about £15 billion, which is a really big loss to what is seen as quite a positive scheme for making our homes warmer, more environmentally friendly, tackling fuel poverty and heat inequality. So a lot of people really frustrated by that. And the other one is the announcement that they will stand by their commitment to end North Sea oil licenses, which is great news. There's a small caveat that people who already have licenses are allowed to do drilling in a slightly wider area. but the amount of oil that will actually extract is very, very minimal compared to allowing new oil fields. This doesn't give us an answer on Rosebank, but it does give some kind of security to the movement, knowing that new oil will not be extracted in the UK, at least while this government is in power. So that's the kind of top line of the environmental things, but why does that matter? And why should you write to your MP about the budget? The budget is a tricky thing because it's the government standing up and saying what they believe in and what they want to do over the year. And so some people think that means there's no real point engaging on it because it's happened, it's set in stone. That can be true with certain policies, but as we saw last year with reversals on cuts to disability benefits and other welfare taxes, if there is significant disagreement or frustration by the public and by the party, governments do U-turn on things announced in the budget. So it's not to say that there's no reason to reach out. We absolutely should be reaching out to our politicians to let them know if we're frustrated by what's been announced in the budget, but also to let them know that we're supportive of certain things. Sometimes things get announced in the budget and for various reasons don't make it into law just because they fall by the wayside. And it's really important to encourage politicians to let their government know that actually these things are positive, whether that's the fuel duty changes or the scrapping of certain things or backing the end of oil extraction. So it's a really important opportunity to change legislation. But it's also a really great way to start building a relationship with your politician. It's quite an easy thing to reach out about, to discuss. MPs will be expecting that discussion over the coming weeks and months. And it can be a jumping off point to talk about issues that were raised in the budget and more widely. So if we head on to the next slide, I think we've got a video that's going to play, which is by Nadia Whittome. Oh, and I can't hear that, Joe. So bear with me. Don't know if that's on your end.
I think I may need to make sure that I am sharing my computer audio. So if you bear with me 1 second, I will need to. Hang on.
Sorry, I just realised I was muted there. While Joe is setting that up, I'll just explain the video, which is Nadia Whittome, MP. We did an interview with her last year talking about the importance of hearing from her constituents on a whole range of issues, but particularly on climate and nature, and how that informs the work she does in Parliament. So hopefully that will work in a moment, but if it doesn't, we can always share it with you later in the session.
Yeah.
It's really important. I think for me, it kind of sharpens my focus, and especially if there are like lots of the same issue that is being raised by constituents, then I think, okay, I need to make sure that I prioritise this, whether that's asking questions of the government or signing motions, writing articles, speaking about it in the chamber, which is the House of Commons, like sometimes we call it the chamber. And I think as well, like having personal stories and anecdotes means that I can use those when I'm speaking to ministers or when I'm like writing a speech and speaking in the House of Commons. So that's really useful to hear about how the climate crisis is impacting people's everyday life.
Froze towards the end there, but that was the last word of the video. But yeah, we can see there that these are things that genuinely are helpful to politicians in pushing forward when they're supportive, but it also can be very formative in terms of them working out what exactly does the local voter in that area want to see changed, which can be very motivating for local politicians. But not all letters are equal in terms of creating a powerful message. So, what leads to letters that are less effective or more easily ignored? Well, first thing to mention is all politicians, but especially MPs, receive a huge amount of correspondence from local constituents, correspondence from campaigns, correspondence from larger institutions and charities, and many of them will have small teams, and a large part of those teams' jobs will just be sorting through all of this communication and helping them connect to the stuff that is the most effective for them to engage with, things that are going to help them with their representation. But their offices are never staffed adequately for the amount of processing they have to go through, and often that they're overwhelmed by the backlog of emails that they have to sort through, and it often means that they get to emails far too late and they're not able to act on it at the right time. And then sometimes, if they feel like they can't act on it at the right time, they won't respond at all. So there's a lot that goes into processing emails and working out, does this need a response? When does this need a response by, etc. And unfortunately, some letters just don't cut through. They're easy to ignore. They seem like, well, we'll put this. We've talked to a lot of politician staff over the years, and they talk about things like, for example, letter writing campaigns where you have a formula of a letter that that you copy and paste and you add your name to and send it off. Those letters, politicians pay attention to them, but what they tend to do is they recognize early on, this is a campaign letter. We will file this into you get these inbox folders. We'll put it in an inbox folder and we'll wait for it to hit a certain number before we take a response. Because if we get 2 or 3 of them, then we don't feel a huge, enormous pressure to get back to them all. But if we get 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, whatever the number is, we'll make sure that we take a solid response on our public platforms. Now, that can be really, really powerful if you've got lots of momentum behind your movement, but not quite as effective if you are an individual or a group and you really want to build a more in-depth relationship. You can feel that your letter gets easily pinged off to the side. And so you need to make it clear that this is not a generic campaign letter or a template of any kind. This is a call for response. You want something more out of this. We get a lot of people come to us and saying the problem is the responses that they do get are very copy and pasted, very generic, and they don't feel like they are connecting with the politician on a real level. And often it can be because sometimes a letter is not abundantly clear exactly what the writer wants from the politician. It will be an expression of a certain feeling, but it won't necessarily give a sense of this is what I want you to do in response to this. So we'll come to this later when we talk about clear calls for action in our letters. But sometimes a politician has to go through a lot of people expressing a lot of sentiments on a lot of issues, and therefore, unless there's a real key call for a follow-up action, they will give a more generic feeling response, and that can be where that frustration often leads from. So then the question remains, how do I make my letter cut through? How do I get through all this noise that goes into the inboxes of my local politician? And how do I make my communication the one that cuts through and actually secures some kind of meeting or action from the politician? So we like to follow the advice of Robert Harfin, who is an ex-MP. And he wrote an article about this saying, if you want to successfully lobby your MP, you need to do 2 things. You need to make it personal and make it local. Now, to be clear, when he says make it personal, we don't mean like personal insults or, getting really angry at them and saying that they're a horrible person. We mean make it personal to you, make it personal to your community, and make it something that is clearly impacting people within his constituency. And we talk about this through the idea of common ground. Now, we did a previous session on this earlier in the carousel of training around the autumn budget, but common ground is basically this idea, if you look at what are your interests, why are you invested in this area, thinking about the politician and what they really connect with in the local area through learning a bit about them, researching about them, and finding that connective point that will really make a compelling case. Now, again, the short version of that is it could be something based on that politician's interest. It could be something that really impacts the local community and will uplift everyone in the local community. Or it could just be something that you think really makes this relevant to you and the people around you, and you can give a really personal and heartfelt plea and story about why this matters, as opposed to throwing lots of numbers at them and why this is important to the whole globe, which we all know the climate and nature crisis is, but sometimes that can be such a large concept to process that it almost becomes an alien idea and doesn't really cut through to a compelling piece of motivation. And that's where the personal and the local can be more effective. So how do we build a strong letter to our politicians? So we're going to start with some of the general tips, and then I'll hand over to Alfie after this slide to talk a little bit about how we start with a strong elevator pitch. But first of all, we talked about this idea of link to local people and why this issue is so important to you and your community is really, really important. It's very easy to talk about things in a numerical or scientific sense, particularly with climate and nature, but that can often make it seem very detached from the day-to-day lives of the people in the local area. And unfortunately, that can make it seem like a very alien concept to politicians in particular, especially if they're not already well versed in the climate and nature world. So really connecting with the local issues and the backup benefits that will come with your certain position. So more renewable energy will help keep bills lower in the long run, for example. It's not about saying that you don't focus on climate, but it's about saying, how is this a win for everybody? How do local people benefit from this approach as well to make this just an absolute, no-brainer decision? We also suggest creating an elevator pitch, which Alf's going to go into a bit more detail in a moment. But basically, in short, this is just a really short, sharp, confident, and targeted summary of what this is all about and why this should matter to the politician. And finally, and this one is quite key, clear action you want the politician to take. Talking about things in theory can be very, very powerful, and a politician can go, that's great, and I really agree, and I think that's really important. But then the political system around them will just, through the inertia of it, carry them on in the same direction. And unless they have a real call to action of, I'm going to make that, however small a step, to push things in the direction that they need to go, they will just look at the letter, they'll nod, and they won't actually go on to take any further action. So therefore, we need to be really clear about what we want from this. And again, this doesn't have to be something huge or complicated. It could be as simple as just come and have a sit-down conversation with me about this, and we can talk more about why this matters and what can be done about it. But really, before we get to any of that, one of the key things is making sure we've got a good elevator pitch. And for that, I am going to hand back to Alfie.
I can unmute myself. Fab. So one of the tools that can be really useful in putting together a letter, and then also when you actually are meeting with a politician, is to have an idea of an elevator pitch. And this is a concept some of you may have come across before, but effectively an elevator pitch is just a really short, snappy introduction to what the issue is, why it matters to you, why it should matter to them, and maybe even a little bit of what you want them to do about it. And they're called an elevator pitch because the idea is that you could get into a lift with someone, go up in the lift, and by the time they left the doors, they would know about your issue, know about what they could do about it, and know what they could do next. And so that's the kind of rough idea around it. These are really useful to do because I think particularly when it comes to any issue that we care about, really, we have such a good internal understanding of why we care about that issue, and we might have cared about that issue for our whole lives, and be really, really passionate about it. And there's so much stuff wrapped up in it about why we care, why we get involved, all of that stuff. And while that's really important, sometimes when someone actually sits us down and wants to hear about it, it can all feel a bit jumbled and muddled, and actually getting it across succinctly and clearly is really useful. And so taking some time to sit and think about what that would be for yourself can be a really effective tool in doing this. And as I said, this can be something you do while you're writing a letter, but it's also something that will be useful when you actually go into a meeting with a politician. There's lots of ways to do an elevator pitch, and there's not necessarily a right or wrong way. Even just sitting down and thinking about it for a few minutes is a really good idea. But we do have a structure that we think is really useful, particularly when you're putting together that letter. And we call that purpose hook map. So the first one of them is the purpose, just making it really, really clear why you are writing to them, what you're writing, why you have taken the time to reach out to that politician, and why they need to listen to your issue. So for an example there, I'm writing to bring your attention to an issue which is hugely significant in our local area, air pollution or sewage, river pollution, or lack of good, clean public transport, or whatever it is. Just setting that out right at the beginning. I don't think you can be too obvious in a letter to someone, because so much of what we know, we've learned over a long period of time, and that politician probably has a good understanding of it, but might be picking that up for the first time. And then a hook, something that really stands out to the politician. This could be a statistic, such as air pollution is the second highest cause of deaths worldwide. It might be a local statistic, what the levels of impact of air pollution were locally, for example. It could be a short, succinct anecdote, a quote that you've heard from someone in the local community, just something that gets them really interested early on and makes them keep on reading so that they can get to your ask, which will come later in that letter. And then a map, kind of laying out for that politician what it is you're going to be getting them to do, leaving out that support for them and really quite clearly spelling it out. As we said, we're going to come to that very maybe clear ask earlier, but oftentimes when we're writing to a politician, we're asking to meet or for them to do something. And so just being really clear what that next action for them is once they finish that letter, once they put it down, what you want them to do next. So for example, it would be good to get your views on the issue and find out how we can work together to do something about it. And ultimately what that means is this isn't necessarily very nice, but having worked for politicians and worked with politicians in this work for a little while, they're not very good at engaging in something for a super long period of time because they've got 3,000 things coming at them and they think they're quite important. So if you can get that across really quickly at the top of the sentence, it means even if they don't go on to read the whole letter, but they probably will because they've been introduced to it well, they've got a good understanding and they know what they need to do next. So it's about clarity and compelling someone to do something. So that's just something to be thinking about. The other thing that we encourage people to think about, again, when you're writing the letter and when you're meeting, is to think about your language and tone. It's really easy, I find, when I'm writing a letter particularly, to get really kind of caught up in it, and I write something and it feels really passionate and engaged, and then I read over it and it actually sounds quite critical or rude or aggressive. And we might be angry. I often are angry when it comes to issues like this. But that will come across to the politician sometimes as accusation or a lack of willingness to engage and cooperate, and sometimes just comes across as having a big telling off, which, if you've been to our previous sessions, triggers some of those defensive behaviours that politicians can exhibit, where they kind of shut down from the conversation and they're just thinking about how the reply they can do will convince you otherwise, rather than listening to your issue and thinking about how you can work together. So rather than kind of focusing on divisions between you and the politician, or making demands and accusations of them, or accusing them of being a certain thing, or their party, or all politicians or government being a certain thing, trying to think about positive solutions and collaboration, opportunities to work to make the issue better, where the common ground may be, where co-benefits of your action that connect with their passions are, and what those solutions are, can be really useful. This can sometimes sound a little bit twee, and that's not the intention at all. We still want you to be kind of honest and real and a bit fiery if you need to be about the issue. You want to show your enthusiasm, but if that letter can communicate a desire to work with that person to do something about it, we often find that leads to better results long term than what can sometimes feel really good in the moment, which is just getting all your anger out on a piece of paper and sending it to them, but actually never getting a meaningful interaction on the back of that. So something to consider. There's a time and place for every kind of feeling and reaction in politics, but in that sort of long-term relational approach that we advocate for, we find that the stuff on the right works a lot better than the stuff on the left. I think I'm handing back to you, Joe, to run this exercise.
Yes, indeed. I should also clarify with what Alfie just said. We mean the right and left of the screen, not the political spectrum.
Yes. Good clarification.
I suddenly heard that and I went, I'm just going to make sure we've clarified that. No, yes, these approaches in terms of that positive approach is what we would recommend to have those productive conversations. So, taking all of these theories and applying them to a tangible structure and approach to writing a letter, we actually have a 5-step process, quite literally handily demonstrated by hand. So we'll run through this step by step. But basically, we think if you did these 5 steps by the end, you should have a letter that is a really good starting point to be sent to your local politician. Obviously, may want redrafting and spell checking, but overall, it will be about where you need it to be. So first of all, we want to start by briefly introducing yourself. And this is including really any relevant details to who you are and what you're about. We are not of the firm belief that you misconstruing any information about who you are, what you stand for, is ever helpful. We've had some people suggesting that, oh, well, I'm a campaigner for this campaign, should I not mention it? We find that often leaves politicians feeling misled or frustrated if they find that out later down the road. So we always say be very upfront about who you are and the campaigns that you stand for. We understand the logic behind it. People don't want to be pigeonholed into being a quote unquote activist, because unfortunately, some people seem to create this idea that there are activists and there are real people, which seems to suggest that activists aren't real people, but some kind of other creature. But we know that that's not the case. But we understand the logic then that people would want to not seem like an activist and try to be more humanized. But unfortunately, the reality is that eventually it will become clear that you are a more experienced campaigner if you are, and therefore you're better being upfront about that. And if you're not a campaigner, equally be upfront about that as well. It's about making sure that the reader knows who you are and what you're about. Also, things like if you already met that politician before, maybe cite that. We met at this event on this date. That can be a really great way to make you seem like a familiar face and not like just a mysterious figure behind a screen. And then, as soon as possible, get to the core topic of what you want to talk about. It doesn't have to be much. You can just say, I'm writing you today to discuss air pollution, water pollution in our local area, green energy, whatever it is. Then your next step is the one that I always feel a little bit more bashful about saying, but the reality is it does actually work and help disarm a politician. Showing a little bit of appreciation for the politician's work can go a long way. Now, to be clear, what I don't mean is you have to go into some kind of ego stroking mode where you are just telling them how brilliant they are and how you have no issues with what they've done at any point. But the reality is that politicians will probably get a lot of communication from a lot of people that are primarily focusing on failures and things that they are not doing enough. And in particular, they will have people who have no interest in actually seeing anything productive coming out of that conversation. They're just looking to vent for good reasons or for bad. They just want to make it known that they don't like that politician. And unfortunately, this can lead to a lot of politicians to being preemptive and defensive and very willing to dismiss what people have to say if they feel like they're just having a go. So demonstrating some appreciation for things that they have done that you do think are good, if you can, and sometimes it is tricky if you have a politician that really stands against a lot of what you believe in. But that can go a long way to demonstrate that you're not just here to take whatever weapon you can to hit the politician around the head with, metaphorically speaking, but that you have an issue that you're passionate about and your priority is seeing that problem solved, not in the point scoring or the pro or anti one politician or another in the process. So this could be some of their work that they've done locally that you think has been beneficial to the community. It could be a bill or a particular issue that they've spoken up on that you agree with them on. And this is where we think research can be really important. Understanding your politician and making sure that you understand what they actually are currently doing and what they care about can be quite key. And the reality is, even if you fundamentally disagree with the politician on a lot of things, there are some issues that, at least publicly, a lot of politicians stand pretty in similar camps about. And so it shouldn't be too hard to find something that at least they have spoken on in a way that you can agree with, even if the back of your mind is saying that maybe they don't actually mean it. You saying, I really agree with you when you said that, really demonstrates that your focus on the issues takes precedent over who you like in politics and who you don't. The next thing you want to do is highlight the main points you want to be received in terms of the issue. So we would say that 2 to 3 short points within your first contact letter is about as much as you want to put across. Unfortunately, some people get really over eager in trying to get across as much of the information about this issue as possible. And so they just put reams and reams of text into an email until it's about 5 full A4 pages, both sides of information. And this can be far too much for a politician to read. And also all the core ideas that you want to get across will be lost in the nitty-gritty detail of what you're explaining. So 2 to 3 short points can really just effectively put across why that matters. And also why it should matter to them. So again, it comes back to this idea of research. What are the issues that your politician speaks on the most? And are there actual connections between the benefits of what you're suggesting and the things that they really care about? If possible, that'd be great. If not, just why this is going to be helpful to the local area. What are the things that local people will notice and will appreciate about making this change? And then number 4 is very, very important. What do you want the politician to take from this email? Or probably a better way of wording that, what do you want the politician to do about this? What do you want them to act upon? Whatever the action is, so yeah, sorry, I lost myself in that sentence. It could be that you want them to go straight from that letter and take an action. If you're not comfortable in this, then leading to a meeting. But we do recommend that if you can, try and get a follow-up meeting. It's very humanizing to meet with an MP. It puts it puts a face to a name and it puts a face to a cause, which can really help them see exactly why this issue matters, not just to people, but to local people, to them. And it takes away their ability to create this imagined activist class and actually demonstrate that, no, this is a local person who really cares about this and wants to see this changed. We would recommend putting that action, whether it be the meeting or another specific action you want them to take, whether, political action or what, and put it in bold. So obviously we would recommend typing out your letters, and we would recommend this being highlighted in bold so that the eye is drawn towards it. And even if everything else in the letter goes right over their head, they know what you are writing to them about, so that there's no confusion as to whether this is just a general update or a specific call to action. It's a specific call to action. This is the action we want you to take. And then finally, just a quick thank you for reading the letter. It always goes down well. And sign off with your name. And if you don't take anything else away from this session, please take this away. Your area of residence. Your local politician has no obligation to respond to correspondence from anyone outside of their constituency or ward if it's a councillor. But in this case, we're focusing on MPs. So you need to make it abundantly clear that you are a local person, and it will absolutely skyrocket the likelihood that you will get a response. It still doesn't guarantee it. Sometimes you'll still drop off their inbox, but they will almost automatically ignore emails from outside their local area because they have no obligation to respond to them. Very, very rarely will they respond to individuals who don't live in that area. And even if they do, it's only if they're in some way representing a local group or a local organization. So make sure you're abundantly clear that you are a local person. Here is where I'm from. Even a postcode can be helpful, whatever you feel comfortable sharing, but something that clearly identifies that you are from within their constituency. And something evident, just saying, thanks very much from Jim, who lives in your constituency, isn't enough. It has to be something concrete, like a street name or a local neighborhood, or ideally a postcode. They can be quite effective. But again, sometimes some people aren't comfortable with sharing that. We understand, but just something identifiable that you are local. So, what that might look like in practice is something like this. So, really quickly, my name is blank, and then a little bit of information about this is why this is so important. These many people a year in the UK have death linked with air pollution, and I'm passionate about clear air for all. I was really happy I've invented this politician for this example, but it was really happy to hear that you included a need for action on clean air in your maiden speech in Parliament. Might be something that they've done that you might want to cite. I'm glad we agree on the need for urgent action on this issue, just really clear and concise why that's important. I believe we urgently need the government to take strong action on passing a clean air bill in Parliament, including duties for local councils to take action to reduce clear air pollution in their area. So that's probably about 2 points of what you think are the key things that need to change. And then I want to meet with you, and in bold, meet with you to discuss the issue and how to achieve the necessary change. Let me know when you might next be available. I can meet any Friday afternoon in the next month. Again, giving an indication of when you might be free skips over some steps of, oh, I'd love to meet, but I'm not free then, or I'm not free then. Again, ideally, if you've got a flexible schedule, make that clear because it makes it harder for the politician to dodge you on a sense of, well, I'm sorry, I'm not free on that date, or I'm not free on this date. So, the more flexible you are, the more important it is that you communicate that. And then finally, thank you for taking the time to read this letter, and I hope to speak to you soon. Name, and in this instance, we would use the full address so it's abundantly clear that we're local. And again, you could take that and with a few tweaks, check it for your spelling and all of that, that could go off and you have got a letter that has gone to a local politician. So we are now going to do a quick 5-minute exercise to test this process out. And I do mean 5 minutes. So what we're going to do is we are going to take each step, except for the 5th one, because I don't want people to be sharing their own locational information to people they maybe don't know on the internet. But each of the other steps, we are literally going to take a minute to write a version of that step in the journey, in the letter writing journey. Ideally, if you wanted to pop it in the chat and we can share it with each other, that'd be great. But we're going to do a minute for each one. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's going to be a starting point, and then hopefully you can go away from that and you can be ready to share that with your local politician after a little bit of tweaking after today's session. So you've got everything you need to start that letter. So to start off with, we're going to do our introductions with the relevant details, what we're all about, and we're going to set a minute timer to try and get as much of that done as possible. Doesn't matter if it's really scratch at this point, but we're going to take a minute starting now. And that is time. So we'll reset that timer in a second. If anyone has that on the computer and feels confident in copying and pasting it into the chat and sharing, we'd love to see it. No pressure if not. Um, Lovely. Goodness. I'm the convener of our local name, U3A Environment Group. Fantastic. So again, putting that heart on the sleeve, this is who we are, this is what we're about. So you give your name, add that bit of information. One from here, from Deborah as well. Hi Lee, we meet around your offices during Act Now Change for every week. Thanks for exclaiming nature of bill becoming an act of parliament. Obvious, understood, Deborah, it's not finished. And again, you can take each of these sections and carry on working with them afterwards. We just want to kind of get some of these get your brain thinking on each of these steps. But yeah, some great stuff in there. We've got referencing other times we've met them. Deborah's already jumped ahead a little bit and talked about something we really appreciate. That's great. Talking about our role and again, what something organizing we stand with. Talking about groups can also be really powerful as it can also cite like I'm not the only one talking about this. We have a whole group of people who are really passionate about this issue, showing a breadth of support. We are going to jump straight into the next section. So next we're going to be doing politicians' appreciation of their work. So again, if you don't have something currently that you know about, think about things that maybe their party have done that you are supportive of, or maybe just something that you think has been positive within Parliament in the last year or so. And you can always go away, do some research, and change that section later to focus on that politician. But we're going to take a minute, and when you're ready, off you go. Oh, hang on, not 5 minutes, 1 minute, off you go. Lovely stuff. So, once again, if anyone's feeling brave and wants to pop their example or even just a snippet of their example into the chat, then do feel free. We'd love to see some of this stuff. This one is always particularly interesting. I think sometimes some people hit a wall with this because they're so frustrated at politics in general, they don't really want to give it too much of a compliment. From Denise, I know how passionate about promoting the interests of the local farming community. Great. And so you may then see a bridge between that and the issue that you are particularly talking about, whether it be local nature, sustainable farming, soil quality, or even just, the importance of if we don't take action on climate change, farming in the UK is going to become a less and less feasible option because of extreme weather, for example. So a really good starting point to launch off onto the issue that you are particularly passionate about. If anyone's got any more, feel free to share. Otherwise, I'm just going to quickly reset our timer and we're going to move on to the next section. So in this section, it's about highlighting the main point you want to make. What's the thing you want to see change? So this might be more, it could just be something general, like more action needs to be taken on blank issue, or you could have something really specific that you want to see happen. In that last example, talking about the need for a Clean Air Act in Parliament that properly addresses, sets expectations for councils to do a certain amount of stuff for clean air. It doesn't, there's no set expectation of what that's going to look like, but try and keep it to no more than 2 or 3 short points, whether that be bullet points or sentences. We're going to start that minute now. Lovely stuff. So we are running a little close on time, so I'm going to actually jump straight to the next one, just to make sure we've all had a chance to get these drafts. We all get a draft done. So then we're going to go to four. And when you think about what would you like your politician to do, we would always advocate that in the first instance to invite to a meeting. But if for whatever reason you're not able to do that, thinking about what could be an action that they could take to demonstrate that change. Um, Amazing stuff, Glenis. Yes. So really emphasizing the importance of that issue is really, really good. So yeah, thinking about how we might want to form that invitation to meet, or it could also be you invite them to an event or invite them to meet with a group. Doesn't have to just be a one-to-one meeting. We're just going to add that call to action now, within a minute. Wonderful stuff. Okay, so what we would then do, but we're a little pressed for time, is we then get you to just add your name to that and put that to one side. But that's something you can do after today. Just make sure whatever form you've written this down in, you'll have access to after today's session. So if you've just put it in the chat, make sure to copy it across to another form. But in the meantime, just make sure that you've got it captured because that is your starting point for your letter to your local politician. And I'm going to hand over now to Alfie, who will just help wrap up today. And then we've got some time for questions. If any of you have time to say a little bit later, if you do have any questions. But Alfie, over to you.
Fab. So I will just stop the recording there. Thank you for those of you who are watching this back online.